My name is Daniel Mercer, and I still remember the date October 17th, 2002. That was the day everything in my life, everything I ever thought I believed, everything I ever feared, and everything I didn't even realize I was avoiding, was cracked open like a sealed tomb, and I came face to face with something I can only describe as both terrifying and beautiful. I was working in Rome at the time, stationed there for a historical preservation job contracted through a European academic archive I'd been affiliated with for years. I wasn't clergy, not by a long shot. I was just a history nerd with a paintbrush and a preservation lab coat, with a degree in classical antiquities and a stubborn curiosity about anything older than a few hundred years. I didn't have much of a personal faith back then. I wouldn't have called myself an atheist exactly, but I sure wasn't praying before bed. I saw the church, especially the Vatican, as a vault of ancient mystery, fascinating in its opulence and secrecy, but more like a museum than a spiritual lighthouse. I had come from a long line of quiet skeptics, my father being a high school chemistry teacher who always told me, if you can't test it, you can't trust it. So there I was, on an unseasonably warm October morning, standing inside a seldom-used passageway beneath the Basilica di San Clemente, not technically Vatican grounds, but close enough that the air felt old with incense and mystery. We were cataloging remnants of an old bishop's chamber that had partially collapsed during the early 20th century, preserved now behind metal braces and scaffolding. That morning, my colleague Marta and I were brushing away sediment from what we assumed was just a marble altar leg that had sunk at a weird angle. But when I pressed against one side of the slab, I felt it give slightly, like a loose tile on a bathroom wall. I remember turning to her and whispering, "Did you feel that?" And the next few moments are still a blur. We managed to pry the slab loose, and behind it, embedded in the rock wall as if someone had sealed it off on purpose, was a recess. Inside that recess was a stone coffer. Heavy, cold, old beyond comprehension. We had uncovered sealed vaults before, usually empty, sometimes holding tiny reliquaries or notes. But this one felt different. As we lifted it from its dusty coffin of stone, the room changed. It was as if the temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Marta actually paused and rubbed her arms. "You feel that?" she said, and I nodded. I felt it in my spine. I felt it in my teeth. Something wasn't right. We carried the coffer to the portable table we'd set up just beyond the chamber. There was a single clasp, bronze, engraved with a symbol I didn't recognize. It wasn't the usual Christogram or Vatican seal. It looked like an omega inside a halo. And when I popped it open, the moment is still frozen in my memory like a still photograph etched into the deepest part of my mind. Laying inside, wrapped in velvet cloth that hadn't disintegrated, impossibly, was a gold ring. Ornate, undeniably old, and yet polished in a way that made no sense, as if time hadn't touched it. The name carved into it was clean, almost too clean. It read, Clemens XX. I looked at Marta. She looked at me. "There's no Pope Clemens the 20th, she whispered. And she was right. I knew papal history as well as I knew my own face. There had only ever been 19 popes named Clement. There was no 20th. It felt like the walls of reality had buckled slightly. We immediately flagged it to our coordinator, who contacted the Vatican's preservation team. Within 2 hours, the room was sealed, our notes confiscated, and we were escorted out by plainclothes Vatican guards. I wasn't angry. I wasn't confused. I was deeply uneasy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept feeling like something was watching me. Not someone. Something. Not threatening, exactly, but like an ancient I had opened and was quietly observing me. That sense of unease followed me everywhere for the next 3 days. Then, on the 4th day, October 21st, I collapsed. I was walking along the Tiber River near Ponte Sant'Angelo when my vision blurred. My chest tightened. My breath caught like a hand was gripping my lungs. I remember grabbing at my chest and falling to my knees. I couldn't speak, couldn't cry out. I thought I was having a heart attack. But what happened next wasn't a trip to the hospital. It wasn't an ambulance or a doctor's room. It was something else entirely. Everything went dark. Not the kind of darkness you get when you close your eyes, but the kind of darkness that feels like it has depth, like it's swallowing you inch by inch. I remember trying to scream, but there was no sound, no air, just blackness. And then, in that blackness, a single pin of light appeared far in the distance. And I was moving toward it. No, being pulled toward it. The light grew, and with it came warmth. Familiarity. I felt a kind of peace that no language can describe, like being remembered after a lifetime of being forgotten. I didn't see tunnels. I didn't see my life flash before my eyes. What I saw was a place that wasn't quite a place. It was endless, and yet it felt close. It was bright, but not with sunlight. It was full, but it wasn't crowded. There were no voices, but I heard words. There were no faces, but I felt presence. I knew that something holy was in front of me, something sacred beyond comprehension. I fell to my knees. Or maybe I was already on my knees. It's hard to describe. Time didn't behave the same way there. A presence approached me, not walking. It simply came nearer. And then I heard the words, not with ears, but in my soul. You were shown what was hidden because you no longer believe in what was always known. I wept, not out of sadness, but out of something deeper. I realized how arrogant I'd been, how I'd made knowledge my idol and buried wonder beneath skepticism. And then I was shown the ring again, but not in my hand. It hovered in the light, and I saw that it had been worn by someone who never ruled, someone who had been erased. You are standing on stories silenced by power, the voice said. But truth is never buried. It waits. I wanted to stay. I begged to stay, but I was told it wasn't time, that what I'd seen must be remembered, must be told, that this was not for scholars, but for seekers. And then, in a flash, I was back, gasping on the riverbank, surrounded by paramedics. My heart had stopped for over 4 minutes. They said I was lucky to be alive, but I wasn't lucky. I was chosen to witness. And now, I must speak. After I woke up in the hospital, everything around me looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The fluorescent lights above my bed flickered faintly, and I could hear the quiet murmur of machines tracking my vitals. But it all seemed distant, almost like I had returned to a place I no longer belonged to. I laid there in that narrow hospital bed in Rome's Ospedale Santo Spirito, staring at the ceiling for hours, unmoving, as tears silently pooled in the corners of my eyes and slipped down my temples. The doctors came in and out, first in Italian, then in English, saying things like ventricular fibrillation and acute cardiac arrest, but I wasn't listening. I didn't care. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't even confused. I was awestruck, like someone who'd seen behind the veil of a theater stage and realized the play was real all along. When they finally let my brother Lucas call from New York, his voice cracked halfway through the sentence, and he asked me, "What happened to you?" I couldn't explain it to him, not fully. I just said, "I died, and I didn't come back alone." After I was discharged, I didn't go back to work right away. I couldn't. I tried walking through the old Vatican side halls again, tried brushing away plaster dust and cataloging artifacts like nothing had happened, but I felt the walls breathing. I know how that sounds. Crazy, like a man who had been touched by death and came back with his mind broken. But I swear to you, I could feel something alive behind those stones. Not in a malicious way, not evil, just ancient, aware, like something waiting. I began noticing things I'd never seen before. Symbols carved subtly into the floors, patterns on old frescoes that hadn't registered until now. And once, in the Sistine Archive where we kept recovered manuscripts, I found an envelope with no date, no seal, just a symbol that matched the one from the clasp of the coffer we found. The omega in the halo. It hadn't been logged in any archive. No one knew how it got there. Inside was a single page, handwritten, in what looked like Latin, but wasn't quite. I couldn't read it. I brought it to a linguist I knew in Trastevere, someone who specialized in obscure dialects and pre-Christian codices. He stared at it for almost 20 minutes before quietly setting it down and saying, "This isn't written in a language we speak. It's written in a pattern only the soul can understand." I laughed at first, thinking he was being poetic, but the look in his eyes said otherwise. He gave it back to me like it burned. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, holding that piece of paper, and I began to pray. For the first time in maybe 15 years, I got down on my knees beside my bed, folded my hands, and I didn't speak to God. I pleaded. I didn't have fancy words or ritualistic form. I just said, "Lord, I don't know what I'm seeing. I don't know what I've been shown, but I believe you sent me back for a reason. Please tell me what to do." And in that silence, I felt a peace. Not a voice, not a vision, just a peace, as if he had already answered. The next day, I got on a train and went to Assisi. I don't know why, really. Maybe it was the pull of the saints. Maybe I just needed to be near something undeniably holy. I wandered through the Basilica of St. Francis and sat there for hours, staring at the frescoes, watching the light dance through stained glass, and trying to make sense of what I was meant to do. An older nun approached me at one point, placed her hand gently on my shoulder, and said in broken English, "You saw him, didn't you?" I looked at her, startled. "What?" I asked. She smiled gently. "You carry light in your eyes, but also weight. That only happens when someone has been near the veil." I didn't know how to respond. I asked her who she was. She said her name was Sister Beatrice and that she had once died as a child and returned. She told me the peace never fully leaves. It stays in your bones. That's when I broke. I cried like a child, sobbing right there in that sacred place, and she knelt beside me and prayed. We prayed together, not loudly, not ceremoniously, just with heart. Afterward, she told me, "Whatever you were shown, you must share it, even if no one believes you, even if it costs you, because the truth doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the faithful." That sentence seared into me like a firebrand. I thanked her, wrote it down in my notebook, and returned to Rome with a new sense of purpose. I began digging, not just in the archives, but into scripture. I devoured the Gospels, especially John. I found myself underlining verses I used to skim past. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. That one hit me hardest. I realized then that what I had seen, the ring, the vision, the erased pope, it wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was a warning that the church, as mighty and beautiful as it is, had buried something it was afraid of. Maybe not maliciously, maybe to protect itself, maybe because men, no matter how devout, are still just men. But the truth I saw wasn't bound to stone or record. It was alive. I knew I had to tell someone, so I reached out to an old professor of mine, Dr. Colleen Hawthorne, who'd retired to a small village in Wales. She had been my mentor, someone who once said, "History isn't what happened, it's what survived being told." When I explained the vision to her over a long email, I expected skepticism, but her reply chilled me. It read, "Daniel, I've waited years for someone to see it too. Come." That's how I ended up on a plane 3 weeks later, heading to the UK with the ring sketch, the note from the envelope, and a heart burning with questions. What she told me when I arrived would open the floodgates of everything I thought I knew about faith, the church, and the nature of divine truth. She showed me documents, not forgeries, not online theories, but carbon-dated parchment sealed in her personal library, obtained through decades of research, some even smuggled from archives that were now closed. One described a conclave that was never announced publicly, a gathering of 11 cardinals in the year 1537, 1 year before the papacy shifted hands officially. The writings spoke of a man chosen, anointed, but never crowned, silenced before he could ascend. The reasons were murky: heresy accusations, foreign interference, or something deeper. But the name? Clemens. Not the 19th, not the 20th. Simply Clemens. He may have been chosen, Colleen said, but he wasn't allowed. And then she showed me the most incredible thing of all, an etching, done in ink, from a private scribe's journal. The ring. The same ring we found. The same symbol. The same impossible engraving. I felt my knees weaken. I whispered, "It's real." She nodded. "And now, you're part of it." I asked her what it meant, what I should do, and she looked at me, not as a professor, but as a believer. "You were shown a truth, and truth demands to be shared. Not for fame, not for rebellion, but because there are people who need to hear that God is still moving, that even the deepest tombs cannot hold back the light." That was the moment I decided I would tell this story. All of it. Even if no one believes me. Even if they call me delusional, or say I imagined it all during cardiac arrest. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know who I stood before. And I know that whatever else may be buried beneath cathedrals and history books, the light of Christ cannot be buried forever. It will rise again and again in those he chooses to send back. I was one of them. I didn't deserve it. But grace isn't given to the deserving. It's given to the willing. And I am willing. That is why I'm telling you this now, no matter the cost. After returning from Wales, something inside me began to shift in ways I couldn't fully explain. I walked through Rome not as a tourist or a researcher, but as someone quietly watching a city move above the bones of a forgotten truth. I would wake up at 4 a.m. and stare at the ceiling, haunted by that voice I had heard, the one that didn't echo in the air, but in my soul. Truth is never buried. It waits. That sentence followed me like a shadow, soft but relentless. It clung to the corners of my daily life, in the way the sunlight poured across the stone floor in the chapel near my flat, in the fluttering sound of pages turning inside the Vatican Library, in the eerie stillness of forgotten corners of catacombs that hadn't felt human breath in centuries. I found myself praying more often, not out of routine, but out of longing. I didn't want to lose the clarity I'd touched on the other side. It had changed me in the deepest parts of who I was. I was no longer hungry for answers. I was hungry for truth. Real, raw, sometimes terrifying, but always holy truth. I started writing everything down, every moment I could remember, every detail I'd seen while I was gone, every feeling, every word. It wasn't about documenting it for credibility. It was about not losing it. Because the world has a way of grinding away at wonder, of wearing down miracles into coincidence. I didn't want that to happen to what I'd experienced. So I wrote, pages upon pages, sometimes late into the night, crying as I scribbled through the memories that kept bubbling up like a stream from an unseen spring. Some memories came in waves, flashbacks to that light, that indescribable warmth, and the overwhelming presence I had felt. Others came more slowly, like whispers drifting in on the wind. One evening, as I was journaling at a small cafe not far from Piazza Navona, a man approached me. He looked like a priest, though not in official robes. He had kind eyes and a calm presence, and he asked if he could sit. I said yes, cautiously. He placed a leather-bound book on the table and asked me what I was writing. I hesitated, but something told me to tell him the truth. So I did. I didn't hold back. I told him about the ring, the vault, the collapse, the vision, the voice, the truth that refuses to die. He listened in silence, then opened his book and showed me a sketch. It was the same symbol, Omega, inside a halo. "You're not the first," he said, "but you are the first who's willing to speak publicly." He explained that there have been others, quiet individuals across the world who'd seen similar things, who'd been taken and shown fragments of forgotten truths. But most stayed silent, out of fear, out of shame, out of pressure. "But you were shown a name," he said. "Clemens." I nodded. "Then you've been called to expose the fracture," he said. "Not to bring chaos, but to bring light into the place where man chose silence over truth." I asked who he was. He said only, "A watcher." Then he stood, blessed me, and walked away. I never saw him again. I don't know if he was an angel in disguise, or just a man of God who was given insight. But what he said set my heart ablaze. I knew I had to go further. I started researching the Lost Conclave more aggressively. I tracked down Vatican scholars who had retired and were no longer on payrolls. I found one man, Father Marius, an old Jesuit now living in Florence, who invited me to visit. I took the train down and spent 3 days in his modest home, surrounded by dusty books and old ink-stained manuscripts. He had spent years studying the interrupted lineages, periods in church history where records go quiet or seem purposefully vague. Men like Clemens, he said, were often erased not because they were unworthy, but because they were inconvenient. That hit me like a punch in the gut. He told me a theory that chilled me, that there had been moments in history where the true voice of God tried to rise through the ranks of man's system, and man silenced it to preserve power. Not always with evil intent, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of politics, but always with consequence. The church, he said, is a vessel for the truth. But like all vessels, sometimes it leaks. Sometimes it's patched. Sometimes it hides cracks. I asked him if he thought the vision I saw was divine or hallucination. He placed his hand on mine and said, "Daniel, hallucinations don't change the way a man breathes. You came back with new lungs." I left Florence with a satchel full of old notes, sketches, and theories. Some were wild. Some were deeply scholarly. But one common thread ran through them all. There had been a pope who was anointed and then erased. The ring I found was the last surviving artifact of that truth. And I had been chosen to see it. Not to exalt myself. Not to start a movement. But to remind the world that the light still breaks through, even in silence. Even in the halls of the sacred. Especially there. Back in Rome, I became restless. I started seeing signs everywhere. Not mystical symbols, but patterns, repetitions. The same verse from Luke showing up in 3 separate sermons I walked by on the street. The name Clemens scrawled in graffiti on a back alley wall. A homeless man whispering, "The old truth returns," while smiling at me on the tram. It was like the universe, or God himself, was gently reminding me, "Keep going. Keep speaking. Don't let this die in your throat." So I began preparing to tell my story. Not in academic journals. Not behind paywalled history forums. But in the open, where people of faith, people of doubt, people of quiet hope could hear it. I found a small Christian media team in Naples that specialized in testimonies. I reached out anonymously, telling them I had a story, one that needed to be heard. When I finally met with them in person, I shared everything. And the director, a woman named Eliza, wept as she listened. "God's not just trying to heal people," she said. "He's trying to wake them up." We agreed to film the testimony in segments. No script, no embellishment, just the truth, raw and sacred. But before we filmed, I spent 3 days fasting and praying in a monastery outside Assisi, begging God for strength. I was scared, not of mockery, but of misunderstanding. I didn't want to be worshipped. I didn't want to be doubted. I just wanted to be faithful. On the 3rd night, I had a dream. Not like the vision during my death, but vivid, heavy, undeniable. I was back in the room of light, and the ring was floating before me again. This time, when I reached out to touch it, it split open, not cracked, not broken, but open like a seed. Inside was a cross. Simple, wooden, radiant. And I heard the voice again. The ring was man's, but the cross is mine. Tell them. I woke up crying. I felt the heat of the Spirit in my chest. I knew that was the confirmation I needed. When we filmed the testimony, I spoke for over 6 hours. No cuts, no retakes, just one long outpouring of everything I'd held in my heart. When it aired, the response was overwhelming. Thousands of messages, some calling me crazy, others saying they had felt or seen similar things. But one message stood out. It was from a woman in Argentina. She wrote, "I've been having dreams of a ring and a lost name for 3 years. When I heard your story, I fell to my knees. God is showing us we're not alone." That's when I realized, this isn't about me. It never was. I was just a vessel, a witness, God had cracked open my life to pour out a message. One I believe many others have been shown in quiet, personal ways. You don't have to die to be woken up, but sometimes some of us do. And when we return, we carry more than stories. We carry pieces of heaven stitched into our hearts. I carried one. I still do. Every breath I take now is filled with purpose. Every moment is a chance to lift the veil for someone else. To whisper to the weary, there is more. So much more. It's been years now since that day by the river. Years since I died, truly died, and saw what lies just beyond the veil. And not a single day goes by that I don't feel its weight pressing on me in quiet ways. Some mornings, I wake up and feel as if I'm standing halfway between two worlds. The light I saw still lingers in the corners of my vision sometimes, especially when I pray, or when I walk through a church and smell the scent of old wood and candle smoke. Sometimes it hits me out of nowhere, when I'm standing in line at a market, when a child laughs, when an old man blesses his bread before eating, and suddenly, I'm brought back to that sacred stillness. It wasn't just a place. It was the heart of God. That's the only way I can describe it. I know now that I wasn't sent back for my sake. I was sent back because there are people, millions of people, living like I was. Faithless, but curious. Hungry, but distracted. People who want to believe in something bigger, but have been taught to put that hunger away. I see them every day. I see it in their eyes. The flicker of hope, buried beneath anxiety. The ache for meaning, covered by the noise of screens and routines. But I also see the ones who are already reaching. The ones who kneel in private, who whisper prayers into their pillow when no one's looking, who light candles not out of tradition, but desperation. If that's you, if you're watching this because something inside you won't stay quiet, know this, you're not crazy. That pull you feel is real. That voice inside you that says, there has to be more. That's not your imagination. That's your soul remembering its creator. You were made to know him, not just from a pulpit, not just through ancient texts, but personally, intimately, eternally. When I died, I didn't find a blank void. I didn't face some cold cosmic silence. I found presence, radiance, truth that breathed and burned and embraced me without asking a single question. I wasn't judged with a clipboard and a list of sins. I was known. I was seen. And in that seeing, I saw myself clearly for the first time. I saw my pride. I saw my doubt. I saw the way I'd used knowledge like a shield to protect me from surrender. But I also saw grace, not just as a word, but as a living thing that wrapped itself around me and said, "You're not finished." That's what I want you to know. No matter where you are in your life right now, whether you're drowning in sin or suffocating in shame or just tired of running, God already knows. And He's not waiting to punish you. He's waiting to welcome you. What I saw, what I experienced, wasn't a hallucination. It was a mercy, a glimpse of what's waiting for us when this life finally lets go of us. And let me tell you, if even a sliver of that light is meant for you, and it is, it's more than worth anything you have to walk through to get there. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be willing. Willing to open your heart. Willing to say, "Jesus, if you're real, show me." Because He will. He showed me. He interrupted my story in the most radical way. I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you this because He still does it. He still walks through walls of stone. He still brings dead men back with fire in their lungs. He still whispers to the lonely in the middle of the night and says, "Come home." That home is Him. It's not a building. It's not a ritual. It's not a checklist. It's relationship. It's surrender. It's love that doesn't make sense, but makes everything else finally make sense. I want you to understand how sacred your life is. You may not feel it. You may think you're a mess, or too far gone, or too skeptical. I get it. I've been there. But I'm telling you, He knows your name. He knows your pain. And the moment you stop running and turn even slightly toward Him, He's already sprinting to meet you. That's the God I met. That's the Jesus who stood in front of me without a word, but filled me with truth so heavy I thought I would break, and peace so light I could have flown. And I want you to know him too. So here's what I ask. Not as a preacher, not as someone who had a vision, but as a brother who died and came back different. Please, don't let this be just another video. Don't scroll past this and forget it by morning. Don't bury the ache in your chest with another distraction. Ask him, right now, in your own words. No script needed. Just speak. Say something like, Jesus, I don't know you, but I want to. I want to believe. Help my unbelief. Meet me where I am. And then be still. Be open. Watch what happens. He will come. Maybe not in a flash of light or a supernatural dream. Maybe he'll come through peace you can't explain, or a phone call from someone you needed to hear from, or tears you didn't expect to cry, or a quiet warmth that shows up out of nowhere and makes you feel whole again. That's him. Don't run from it. Don't explain it away. Receive it. This is your moment. This is why you're here. I believe that. I believe you didn't find this video by accident. You were meant to hear this story, not because I'm special, but because you are seen, known, loved. You matter to God, eternally. And he's calling you, right now, through my voice, through this screen, through every beat of your heart. Listen to him. Come home. The truth isn't buried anymore. It's alive. His name is Jesus, and he's waiting. If this story moved you in any way, if it sparked something inside you that you can't ignore, I invite you to do one simple thing. Don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment below and share what you're feeling, or if you've experienced something similar. Share this video with someone who needs hope. And if you're ready to take that next step in your walk with God, even if it's your very first step, we're here for you. This channel is more than stories. It's a place to wake up, to heal, and to come alive again. Subscribe for more testimonies. And remember, this is just the beginning. God's not finished with you yet.